pregnant and abandoned at a frozen train station. A cowboy took her in and fathered her child. The morning I found her, I was trying to save a water line. That is the honest truth of it. I wasn't out there looking to be anybody's hero. I had a pipe buried under the east platform that had cracked in the cold sometime in the night, and if I didn't get down there before the temperature climbed and the pressure built back up, I'd have a small flood and no water to the stock barn until February. That's what I was thinking about. Frozen pipe, not much else. The Caldwell Flats station wasn't a real station by that point. It had been something once. You could still see the painted letters on the side of the building if the light hit right, and there was a platform and a waiting room and a ticket window that nobody manned. The Northern Pacific still stopped there, barely, twice a week in either direction. Drop off, pick up, 10 minutes. Nobody much used it except ranchers mailing things out or the occasional traveler who had no money to go any farther. It sat on my land about a quarter mile from the house. My father had built the house first, and the railroad came later, and somewhere in the middle of it, all the station had landed on our property and nobody had bothered to sort it out legally. So by default it was mine to maintain. I had the lantern and my pipe wrench and a coil of hemp rope, and I was working my way along the east wall when I heard it. Not a sound you could describe right away, more like something you feel in your chest before you understand it with your ears. I stopped, stood still. The cold it was the kind of cold that has a smell to it, iron and pine and something underground. My breath came out in a white rope that the wind took. And then I heard it again, someone breathing. Not sleeping, not peaceable. The kind of breathing a person does when they are trying not to make a sound and it is costing them everything. I came around the corner of the platform, and there she was. She was sitting on the wooden bench under the overhang, the one that faced out toward the tracks, and she had a carpet bag wedged between her feet and her arms wrapped around herself and her head tipped forward, and she was watching me come around the corner with eyes that did not flinch. Dark eyes. The cold had put red into her cheeks, and her lips were near white. She was wearing a wool coat that wasn't near heavy enough for this weather, and below the coat you could see plain enough she was carrying a child. Far along, 7 months at least, maybe more. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at her and she looked at me, and neither of us pretended the situation wasn't what it was. "The 6 o'clock come through," I said. I was on the 6 o'clock, her voice was steady. That surprised me. "Going which direction?" "East," she paused. "My husband put me off." I looked at the bag between her feet. It was a small bag, the kind of bag you pack if you're not given much time. "How long you been sitting here?" "Since before the sun came up." I looked up at the sky. It was full morning now. She'd been sitting in this cold for 4 or 5 hours. I didn't ask her why. That seemed like a question that could wait or might not need asking at all. Some things you can piece together from what you can see. "Can you walk?" I said. "Yes. I've got a house a quarter mile up the grade, got a stove going." She looked at me, not the way a woman looks at a man she doesn't trust. More careful than that, like she was measuring something specific about me. "I'm not asking for charity," she said. "I know that," I said. "It's still cold." She stood up. It took her a moment, and she didn't take my hand when I offered it, which I respected. I picked up her carpet bag. She didn't argue about that either. We walked up the grade to the house. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. The snow had a crust on it, and our boots broke through with every step, and it made a sound like cracking glass all the way up the hill. Her name was Nora Birch. Had been Nora Calloway before she married, she told me, and the way she said it I understood she was already thinking about which name fit better now. I got the stove going hotter and made coffee and found bread and put out butter and salt pork, and she ate without apologizing for it, which told me she understood that apologizing would be a waste of both our time. Good. I didn't have much patience for performance. She sat at the kitchen table, and I sat across from her, and we were quiet for a while in that way you are when neither person wants to start something that will take a long time. "He have a reason," I said finally. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Her knuckles were still blotched red from the cold. "He said the child wasn't his. It is, but he decided it wasn't." She said it like she was reading from a document. No wobble in it. "Where were you headed?" "Sister in Fargo. I don't know if she'll take me." "We aren't close." I nodded. "Next train east comes through Thursday," I said. "I know." That was Tuesday, 2 days. I looked at her coat, the thinness of it, the bag that held everything she owned. You can stay here until then. She looked at me, the same measuring look as before, only longer now. I don't know you, she said. No, and I don't know you makes us even. She was quiet another moment. I don't have much money. I didn't ask. Another silence, shorter this time. All right, she said. My name is Cal Marsh, and at the time of all this I was 54 years old and had been alone on that ranch for going on 9 years, since my wife Margaret passed. We had not had children, which had been a grief between us, and then after she was gone became just a grief inside me that I carried around without talking about. The ranch was 640 acres, a full section, and I ran cattle on it and kept a kitchen garden and fixed my own fence, and was by most accounts a capable man who lived quietly and didn't ask much of the world, and the world returned the favor. I was not lonely in the way you'd think. I had gotten used to my own company. I liked the silences. I had the work, which was substantial and never fully done, and I had a dog named Webb who had opinions about everything, and a horse named Grant who was 16 years old and had more sense than most men I'd known. I was not miserable. I was what you might call a man who had come to terms. But I will say, and I never said this to anyone while it was happening, that having a person in the house again changed the quality of the air in a way I couldn't quite account for. The sound of someone else breathing in the next room, the smell of another person's coffee, something as small as a different chair being pushed back from the table. My house was the same house it had been the morning before, same beams and same floor and same iron stove, but it felt like a house that had been unlocked. I gave her my bedroom, and I slept in the front room on the cot I kept for spring roundup. I heard her moving around in the night, getting up, going to the window, coming back. I didn't ask about it. By Wednesday, she was helping. I told her not to. She told me she could make herself useful without lifting anything heavy, and if I tried to stop her, she'd find something to throw. I didn't try to stop her. She mended a bridle I'd been meaning to get to for 2 weeks. She swept. She reorganized the tin goods on the kitchen shelf in a way I didn't expect to like, but did. She was not a woman who sat still. Wednesday evening, she asked me about the ranch, and I told her. 640 acres, 70 head of cattle coming into winter, 2 horses now because I'd sold 2 in the fall, some chickens that weren't laying much, a root cellar that was well stocked. She asked good questions, not polite questions, but the kind that wanted real answers. How deep was the well? What the grass was like in summer? Whether I'd had trouble with the creek flooding in the spring. You'd have to go far to find better hay ground, I said. She nodded, looking out the kitchen window. The light was going blue and cold outside. And you run this alone? I do. She was quiet a moment. How? One thing at a time, I said, same as anything. She looked at me then in a way that was different from the measuring look. Softer, more direct. You're not what I expected, she said. I didn't ask her what she'd expected. I had a feeling I knew. Thursday morning she was up before me, which she should not have been, and she was standing at the stove when I came out from the front room, and her face was a color I didn't like. Nora, I'm fine. You look like chalk. She put one hand on the stove edge to steady herself, and I crossed the room in 3 steps and took her arm and got her to a chair. She sat. She was breathing in a careful, practiced way that told me she'd been doing it for a while. How long? I said. She didn't answer. The pains, how long have you had them? They started in the night. She looked up at me. Her eyes were very clear, very steady, but I could see what it was costing her to keep them that way. I thought they'd stop. I looked at her. I looked at the window. The light outside was flat and gray, and there was no way a woman in her condition was walking a 1/4 mile to a train platform, and the train to Fargo, the train that was supposed to carry her out of my life and into her sister's care, would come through in 2 hours and leave again in 10 minutes. The doctor, she said, in town. 12 miles, I said. Her face changed a little, not panic, something more controlled than panic, and understanding. All right, she said, all right. Have you done this before? No. I looked at her again. She looked back at me. There was nothing either of us could do about the situation except do the next thing. Then we'll manage, I said. I will not make it into something it wasn't. It was hard and it was long, and there were moments in the middle of it when I was working purely from what I knew about birth from livestock, and from one memory of watching the doctor deliver the Hensley boy 11 years before when I'd been the only one around. That memory had seemed unimportant until now. I boiled water. I got linens. I kept the room warm. I told her what I was doing at every step, not to soothe her, but because she asked me to, and she didn't make sounds she didn't have to make, and when she did make sounds, she didn't apologize for them. There was a moment, long into it, the light outside was going orange, when she took hold of my wrist with both her hands and held on, and I let her, and I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. The child came at late afternoon. A boy. He came into the world in the bedroom where I'd slept for 20 years in the house my father built, and he cried exactly the way you hope they'll cry, loud and immediate, like he had opinions already. I put him in her arms. She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked up at me. She didn't say anything. There wasn't a word that was going to be sufficient. She just looked at me with the child against her chest, and her hair stuck to her face with effort and her eyes wet, and what was in her face was something I had not had directed at me in a very long time. It was not gratitude. It was something more serious than that. It was recognition. I looked away first. I had things to clean up. She couldn't travel, that was plain. She was in my bed with a newborn son and a December that had decided to become the worst in recent memory, and there wasn't a rational argument to be made for her going anywhere for some time. I didn't suggest she leave. She didn't bring it up. There's a particular kind of understanding two people can come to when circumstances strip out all the usual ways people approach each other. You're not working through introductions or politeness or the slow-measured way people normally decide whether to trust. You're just in the house together, alive together, and all the small daily things. Who makes the coffee? Who goes to the barn first? What gets said, and what doesn't? Those things organize themselves without much discussion. She was nursing the boy. She decided to call him Thomas Birch, and I was running the ranch, and somewhere in the middle of December we had settled into something that worked. I brought in wood. She made biscuits. I fixed the pump on the stock tank. She sewed a flannel square into something fit for a small person to sleep in. She didn't ask permission for things. She just did them. I didn't ask her what her plans were. She didn't ask me what I wanted. But we talked, that I hadn't expected. In the evenings after the work was done, we sat at the kitchen table, her with Thomas when he was awake and me with coffee, and we talked. About the ranch, about the country, about what she'd left and where she'd come from. She was from Ohio originally, had come west with her husband 3 years before, had done the work of building something out here only to have him decide the work didn't suit him. And then, when the child came, to have him decide she didn't suit him either. She talked about it plainly. She wasn't looking for me to be angry about it on her behalf. She just told it the way it was. "Do you miss him?" I said once. She considered that. Thomas was sleeping against her shoulder, and she was patting his back in slow circles. "I miss the idea of him," she said. "The one I had before I understood who he was." She paused. "But I think I had that idea for a long time after it stopped being true, so maybe what I miss isn't even real." I thought about Margaret, about the years after, and what I'd missed, and whether what I was missing was the woman herself or the shape a life takes when there's someone else in it. "I think that's honest," I said. She looked at me. "Do you know what I mean?" "I think I might." January the 14th, my water pump froze through, and I spent 6 hours out in it trying to get the mechanism freed up. I came in after dark with no feeling in 3 fingers on my right hand, and Nora sat me down at the stove and held my hand in both of hers until the feeling started coming back, which is a particular kind of pain you have to just sit through. She didn't flinch from it. She just held on and let me work through it. When the fingers came back, she made me flex them one by one to be sure they were all responding. "Still got them all," she said. "Good, I need them." She was still holding my hand. Neither of us had noted that particular fact yet. "What would you have done if you'd lost them?" she said. "The fingers." "Managed with less." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's your answer for everything." "Usually it works." She looked up at me. She still had my hand in hers. The kitchen was warm, and the lamplight made everything that amber color it gets on cold nights, and Thomas was asleep in the cradle I'd built out of a pine box and some felt, and there was snow against the window, and she was looking at me. "Cal," she said. "Yeah. I want to stay." I didn't say anything right away. I looked at her face, what was in it, nothing uncertain. She wasn't asking me a question that she didn't know the answer to. She was telling me something she'd worked out on her own and had decided to say. "This is your ranch," she said. "I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm asking if there's work here that needs doing, I can do it. And if—" She stopped, started again. "I'd rather be here than anywhere I can think of to go. That's not a small thing to me." The fire popped. Thomas shifted in his sleep. "I was going to ask you the same thing," I said. She blinked. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it for about a week," I said. "You just beat me to it." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised, free. A sound I'd heard from her before, but not quite like that. And then she leaned forward with my hand still in hers and put her forehead against my shoulder. Just rested it there, and I put my arm around her, and we stayed like that for a while. That was the thing, that was it. No declarations, no ceremony right then. Just two people at a kitchen table in the middle of January deciding to stop pretending they didn't know what this was. We married in March. Reverend Aldous came out from Harding with the wind still mean, and the mud up over the wheel rims on the road. And Nora wore her good dress, which she'd let out in October and taken back in since. And Thomas was in my arms because he'd started crying when she set him down and stopped the moment I picked him up, which had become a thing he did regularly. He did it that day in front of the Reverend, and the two hands I'd hired for spring work who stood as witnesses, and Aldous made a remark about the boy having priorities, and everybody laughed. Aldous recorded it in his book. Calvin Thomas Marsh and Nora Ann Birch, married March the 4th. Thomas Francis Birch present. After, I went out to the barn to check on a heifer that had been off her feed, and Nora followed me out without a coat on, which was foolish, and I took mine off and put it around her shoulders without being asked. "You're going to freeze," she said. "I'll be fine." "You always say that." "I'm usually right." She pulled the coat tighter. The sun was out, but it was the kind of March sun that provides light without heat, and everything was still very white and very quiet. She leaned against the barn door and watched me check the heifer, running my hands along her flanks, checking her eyes, and then she said, "What are we going to do about Thomas?" I looked up from the heifer. "What do you mean?" "His name, what he's called, I've been thinking." I waited. "He's already Marsh in people's heads," she said. "The hands call him the Marsh boy. Aldous wrote him as Birch," but she stopped. "I thought I should ask you what you wanted." I stood up. The heifer was going to be all right. I could see that now. She just needed company. "I think a boy ought to have his father's name," I said. She looked at me. Something in her face went still, and then something in her face went not still all at once. "Yeah," she said, "I think so too." So that is how Thomas became Thomas Marsh. We filed the paper the next time we were in town. The clerk at the county office wrote it up without comment, though I suspect comment was made later. I didn't hear it if it was, and if I had, I wouldn't have changed a thing. There are things about a boy that you don't expect. I had not been around children much, had not given it serious thought beyond the old grief, the one I'd learned not to poke at. I expected it to feel foreign, being responsible for a child, being the one he looked to. What I didn't expect was how fast it went the other direction. By the time Thomas was 4 months old, he knew my voice. He'd go still when he heard me come in the door, and his head would come up and he'd look for me. And when he found me, his whole face would do something that well, there is no word for it that doesn't sound smaller than the thing itself. I learned his rhythms, how he slept, what sounds he made when he was hungry versus when he was just restless. I learned how to carry him in a way that settled him down, which was with his stomach on my forearm and his head in my elbow, which Nora called the cattle carry because it looked like I was transporting livestock. I didn't care what it looked like. It worked. I fixed the back room, the room that had been storage since Margaret, and made it into something fit for a child. Built a proper crib, whitewashed the walls. Found a piece of calico in the dry goods in Harding, and Nora made curtains with it, yellow and white. Spring that year was the best in 4 years. I had 70 head coming out of winter in better shape than I'd expected, and the grass came on strong, and the creek ran clear. I hired 2 men full-time and a third part-time, and we put in 12-hour days, and it was the kind of work that makes you feel like the world is asking something specific of you and you are answering it. I'd come in at dark and Nora would have supper ready and Thomas would be in his chair making the sounds he made, and I'd wash up and sit down, and that would be the moment when the day let go of me. Not before. That moment, sitting down to a table set by a woman who had chosen to be there, with a boy who knew my step. Men don't talk about things like that. I'm not sure why. It seems like something worth saying. The summer he was about 8 months old, Harlan Devereaux rode out. Harlan ran the biggest spread in the county, about 4 sections up the river, and he was the kind of man who had enough money and enough land that he'd come to believe the world was arranged for his convenience. He'd made 2 passes at my grazing lease the spring before I found Nora, offering half what it was worth and being surprised when I didn't take it. He rode out on a Tuesday morning, just him and one of his hands, which was how he operated when he wanted you to know he was doing you a favor by showing up at all. I was mending fence along the south pasture. Nora was up at the house. He sat his horse and looked at my fence line for a while. "Heard you took yourself a wife," he said. "I did. Here she came off the train." "That's right." He chewed on something, I didn't know what, came off with another man's get. I didn't stop mending fence. I finished the splice I was working on, tested the tension, reached for the next one. "She came off that train," I said, "because her husband was a coward and a fool. The boy is mine." I looked up at him. "If you've got another take on it, you can keep it to yourself or we can have a different kind of conversation." He looked at me for a while. Devereaux was not a small man and he was not stupid. He'd pushed people around for long enough to know when a push wasn't going to work. "No offense intended," he said. "None taken," I said, though that wasn't quite true. He rode out. He did not make another pass at my grazing lease. He did not come back to my property. Word got around, the way it does in a county that small, and what word got around was accurate. The Marsh boy was Cal Marsh's son, and Cal Marsh was the kind of man who'd tell you so to your face, and that was the end of the discussion. I don't say that to make myself sound grand. I say it because it was simply true. I'm not sure there is a more natural thing in the world than a man claiming his child. The fact that blood was or wasn't involved seemed, once Thomas was in my life, about as relevant as the weather from 2 seasons back. Nora heard about it from one of the hands. She didn't bring it up to me directly. But that evening at the table, she looked at me for a moment longer than usual, and whatever was in that look, I understood it. The fall he turned one, he walked. He'd been building toward it, pulling himself up on the chair legs, standing holding the table edge, letting go and going 3 steps and sitting down hard and looking surprised about it every time. And then one morning in October, I was at the kitchen table with coffee and Nora was at the stove and Thomas was on the floor. And he looked at me from across the room, maybe 8 feet, and he just came. No holding on, no looking for something to grab. He just came across the room like he'd decided the distance between us was something he was done tolerating. He got there and put both hands on my knee and looked up at me. I put my hand on the back of his head. Nora had turned around from the stove. She was leaning against it watching us, and there was a look on her face I couldn't have described to you, all the things that made a face at once. "He went straight for you," she said. "He did. He didn't even look at me." "He knows where you're not going anywhere," I said. "I'm the variable." She laughed, quiet, and then she came over and put her hand on my shoulder and stood there beside me while Thomas worked his way around my knee to investigate my boot, which he found interesting. The 3 of us like that for a moment, in that ordinary kitchen on an ordinary morning in October. The light coming in sideways, and the stove warm, and a boy discovering the world from the floor. I'm not going to dress that up. It was what it was, and what it was more than I'd known what to do with. And I sat there with my hand on my son's head and my wife's hand on my shoulder and thought, not in words, not in any organized way, that there is such a thing as a life finding its proper shape late, when you'd stopped expecting it. And the shape it had found fit. 2 years after Nora and Thomas came, I filed papers to expand the south pasture, another 80 acres I'd been able to buy when the Hensley family moved north. Tom was 2.5 and he had started shadowing me around the property, which meant everything took longer because he had questions about everything. The cows, the fence posts, the tool names, why the creek went that direction, why the sky turned that color in the evening. I answered everything I could. I made up answers for the things I didn't know, and Nora told me later I should stop doing that, and she was probably right. That fall I put Tom on Grant, 16-year-old Grant, who would suffer anything, and walked them around the near paddock, my hand on the horse's neck. Tom sat straight. He had an instinct for it, didn't grab or panic. He just sat there on that old horse like he knew already that the animal was something you trusted and worked with, not something you fought. "He's a horseman," I said to Nora that evening. She was nursing Thomas's little sister by then. We'd had a girl in the spring, Clara, red-haired and opinionated, nothing like either of us, and she looked up. "Of course he is," she said. "He's been watching you." I didn't say anything to that. "Cal," she said it the way she did when she wanted me to hear something. "He puts his feet the way you do. He holds his head the way you do. He has your way of going quiet before he does something. He's been yours since the day he figured out whose voice to listen for." I looked at my coffee. "I know that," I said. "Do you?" I looked up at her. "Sometimes I think you're still surprised by it," she said, "like you're waiting for it to stop being true." I thought about that. She wasn't wrong. "Old habit," I said. "What is?" "Expecting things not to last." She looked at me for a moment. Clara had gone to sleep against her. The lamplight was doing what lamplight does. "They last," Nora said. Not a promise, a statement of fact. From a woman who had been put off a train in December with nothing, and had built a life here with her own hands, and had chosen me to build it with, which still seemed to me like something I hadn't quite earned and had to be careful not to waste. "Yeah," I said, "they do." Thomas was 4 years old the spring the county did its agricultural survey, and the assessor came out to record what each operation had and what it was worth. Young fellow can't have been more than 30, with a leather case and a pencil that he used constantly. He came into the yard and Thomas was there, as Thomas always was when someone new arrived, which was to say immediately and with questions. "Who are you?" Thomas said. "I'm the county assessor," the fellow said. "What's that?" "It means I count things." Thomas considered this. "I can count," he said. "I can count to 40. "That's very good. My dad taught me." I'd come out of the barn by then, and the assessor looked up from Thomas to me. "You're Cal Marsh." "That's right." He put his hand out, and I shook it, and he looked down at Thomas and back up at me. "This your boy?" "That's Thomas," I said. Thomas looked up at me to confirm this was the right answer. I put my hand on his shoulder. "He's mine," I said. The assessor wrote something in his book. We walked the property, the three of us, because Thomas was not going to be left behind. That was understood. And I showed the assessor the South 80 and the stock and the well and the barn, and Thomas provided commentary throughout, most of it accurate and some of it creative. He had opinions about which cows were the best ones and why. He had a detailed explanation of the purpose of the fence posts that was not entirely correct. The assessor listened to all of it with more patience than I'd expected. At the end, walking back to his horse, the assessor said to me, "You've got a fine operation here, Mr. Marsh." "Thank you. And a fine boy." "I know it," I said. Thomas was ahead of us, running toward the house because he'd spotted Nora in the yard, and he always ran to her when he saw her from a distance, which was a thing he'd done since he could run. He ran to Nora and she caught him and swung him up and he said something into her shoulder and she laughed and carried him inside. The assessor watched that. "You're a lucky man," he said. I looked at the house, at my wife and my son going through the door, at the 80 new acres to the south and the cattle I could hear from here, at the ranch that had been quiet for 9 years and was not quiet anymore. "I know that too," I said. There are things a man carries that don't have names. The feeling of a child's weight in your arms when he's fallen asleep and gone completely slack, trusting. The specific sound a house makes when it's full, the movement, the voices, the small collisions of daily life. The way a woman looks at you when she's seen you at your worst and your most ordinary and has decided every morning to stay. I'd had a house and a ranch for 9 years after Margaret. I'd been all right. I want to be clear about that. I was not a man destroyed, not a man who'd stopped living. I was a man who had made his peace with a particular kind of life and was doing it well. But peace and fullness are not the same thing. I didn't know that until I had both. Thomas is 7 now. Clara is 3, and the one after her, we named him after my father, James, is 8 months, and has strong opinions about everything already. The ranch is bigger than it was, and the work is harder, and the winters are still the kind that test you every single year. And every single year, when the first cold comes and the sky gets that particular iron color and I go out to check the water line at the station, because the station is still mine to maintain, because it sits on my land, I stop at that platform for a moment. I look at that bench under the overhang. I stand there in the cold. I'm not a sentimental man. I don't stand there long. I just mark it. The spot where she sat with her carpet bag between her feet and her arms around herself and her eyes that didn't flinch. The spot where my life turned, though I didn't know it at the time. I was trying to fix a pipe. That's what I was doing. You can't plan for the thing that saves you. That much I know. You can be ready or you can not be ready, and the thing will happen either way. What you can choose is what you do with it when it arrives. I went out to fix a pipe. I came home with everything I had. Nora was at the stove when I came in last November, first cold of the year, and I'd been out to the station and come back, and I stomped the snow off my boots in the doorway, and she turned around and looked at me. "You went to the platform," she said. "Pipe might be cracking again." "Cal?" "Yeah." "Come here." I crossed the kitchen, and she put her hand against my face, her warm hand on my cold cheek, and looked at me the way she does, the way she has since that first morning at the table with the coffee. Like she is seeing exactly who I am and finding it sufficient. More than sufficient. The kids were somewhere in the back of the house, audible in the way kids always are. James was making the sounds an 8-month-old makes when he wants to be held. Clara was telling someone, Thomas, probably something that she believed required full volume. Thomas was answering her in his measured way, which he'd gotten from me, and which seemed too old for a 7-year-old, but that was what he was. "The pipe's fine," Nora said. "Probably," I said. "Come sit down." So I sat down, at my own kitchen table in my own house on my own land. And she brought me coffee and sat across from me, and through the kitchen door I could hear my children, and outside the window was the first snow of the year coming down slow and serious. That is what I have. That is every bit of what I have. And I will tell you this plainly, as one man to another. I did not know, for a long time, for years, whether I was the kind of man a good woman would choose. Whether what I had to offer was enough. Whether the quiet and the work and the steady hands and the not much to say were things that added up to something a person would want to stay for. Turns out they were. She told me so, in the kitchen in January with frost on the windows and a sleeping boy in the next room, when she took my frostbitten hand in hers and held it until the feeling came back. She told me so with her forehead against my shoulder. She tells me so by being here every morning in the house we built together out of the wreck of 2 different lives. That's the kind of love that holds, not the kind that makes a lot of noise about itself. The kind that shows up in January in the cold and holds on until the feeling comes back. I was a man alone on 640 acres, and I thought I'd made my peace. And then I went to fix a water pipe. And my whole life walked off a train.